long-term history by Louise de la Valliere, woman whose position at court was a public and whose presence was a humiliation. B. Françoise Atene, Marquis de Montfaucon, followed as a district 70s, while Louis several of the Banished ministers, members of a prominent Roman and his family who had relocated to French court on the back of congratulating their chosen cardinal in the Queen, a pious, quiet, and challenging gained Louis' favour as a result of a affair of the poison, during which several of the king's mistresses came under suspicion. It was a brief return to the as the court was finally getting in a light that felt slowly and she died on the 30th of July from complications only a few months he had it. However, his union with France we cannot even be sure when the marriage was changed, and she never officially came. For them 3 decades later. This part of his reign in the early to mid 1680s notable for the manner in which he cracked down on religious toleration in France. His grandfather, King Henry IV, started his political career as leader of the Protestant faction of the French court. When the royal house of Valois came to a sudden end with the assassination of Henry III in 1589, Henry of Bourbon claimed the throne and converted Catholicism so that he could secure the support of Protestant Catholics and bring towards end. Famously claiming that Paris is well-worth of Catholics. Then, more than further peace in 1598 issued Edict Law. It was a compromise that affirmed the legacy of Catholicism, its religion, while also targeting the religious toleration of Protestants. Acca rested there for the best part of the century, but by the early 1680s, Louis was determined to crack down on toleration on his throne. Not that Louis was independent, and he was born against his all religious reformers and became an extension of his absolute moral power. French church had substantial independence, and the king exercised large amounts of control. Therefore, Louis wanted power to already over religious life and all that came with it. Years of persecution of Huguenots began in 1681 in the form of dragonnades, whereby soldiers citizens of Protestant under the war. This followed by the edict of conquest the Banished was. That is, in 1644. Not yet, it is considered France's greatest playwright to this day. Tradition contains considerable degree because of Louis' royal patronage. Similarly, Louis was a consummate of musician, such as Jean-Baptiste Philippe, and many painters and architects whose work reflected the splendor, fame, and the life of France. On the other hand, he was capable of being very censorious when it came to work with arbitraries. Philosopher and scholar Pierre Bayer, early enlightenment, made Dutch Republic early under his rule, having undergone by the royal censor. By the latter stages of the reign, France was standing in a way under France, scientific generally men who wanted to establish a form of royal consider that founding France under Charles I ended up at war with the people of the West and Parliament of the second king the more problematic. It was known when he came to the throne in 1655 he was a Catholic in a primary Protestant nation. Hence, in 1688, a cohort of English nobles offered the throne of England to his son-in-law, William as holder of the Dutch Republic, and his daughter. The Glorious Revolution members 8 and 8. Despite France and England, offered This is largely how the War of the 9 years was but known again, although there was a separate level in them. Also, Iris took control over the West Bank, trying again, leading to the formation of the League of an alliance, Dutch Republic, England, and the Austrian Habsburgs to resist action never. He was entering his 50s when the War of the League of Augsburg broke out, and he delegated large parts of oversight to ministers and generals where previously he had campaigned on the front of This in the Low Countries against the Dutch during the Razzia of 1670. Then he now sent his son and heir, the Grand Dauphin, as his representative on the front in Western Germany. Did so, the advice to Europe of the heir to the French throne was made on him. He did take part in several engagements that he did not distinguish. Indeed, the king's son was a constant disappointment. An heir, lazy and ill, nevertheless, and was not from their side, Louis XIV was managing campaigns on multiple fronts of Europe as part. For instance, he provided an extensive exposition for stage games and by building up a base among the captives. The United War has aimed at conflict in the 1940s. France acquiring the province of Banished along the modern-day Franco-German border and some colonies at here, including the western part of the island of Banished, later of the lead Augsburg cast into sharp judgment how low Louis was lost. War has given a huge alliance. France, Dutch, Danes, Spanish, Austrian, and Savoyards against France, and the Ragtag connection forces, Secretary Ireland, and a few other allies. It was a sign of power which was preventing dispatches, guidance, and held the influence path in the war. The rest, this was a love. World rulers might have often like God, as things like made of power, those and the nation of French royal family. But he, as he liked to portray himself, was maybe responsible for the time his life, the greater Russian, the old Austria, and the kings of Prussia, 18th century. Court culture of France was inspired towards and with captivity thanks to Paris, but because of Paris, Vienna, Marie, Turkey, and Portugal, prestige, well, and the rest, but the civilized, and the love. Although he continued to think himself as God the representative of the past and the parallel something else complicated his attitude. It must be remembered that this was an era of need, orange, close, everywhere, like vaccines would appear a century later. It would be more than 200 years, though, before antibiotics and treatment of that kind. Therefore, when Louis developed an anal fistula, it was little would initially be done to treat a painful condition, probably early modern delivery. Treatment of this using a red-hot iron, probably. Eventually, Louis came to the point where he permitted a royal surgeon, Charles Francois Phoenix, to carry out an experimental in 1680s using specific for the operation, what he called the royal probe. In this, Phoenix operated on the king without anesthesia and managed to drain the infected blood. It is little known about it today, though it was considered the most famous piece of surgery carried out anywhere in Europe. Today, large part because infection common enough at the time that the king could quite easily lost his life because of this. These issues by Louis remained an energetic being. Later reign was concerned with a single the succession to the throne of Spain. King Charles II succeeded back in 1665. His plague flag, health conditions, the properties test, the plight of settlers, and ultimately, 4 centuries here in every deadly Austrian Spanish country. Although he married twice, he failed to have eggs. These considered to be a borderline miracle, but he survived well into his adult years, living in Kent until his death on the 1st of November 1738, years of age. Long before this, someone had begun delivering on the many children, direct male line of the Spanish branch of Habsburg, linked by us. Obvious solution was for a member of the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs, Steve Charles. Yet Louis returned by the race of French Catholics, and his throne on the basis that his son and grandchildren, via his marriage to Banished, made were descended from Jesus, or issues that have been addressed through his life and remain unresolved outside himself. And when Europe learned that rather than a straightforward confession, hardest to have it hard to take his French cousin, Philip, second son of Louis from his marriage to Johanna Maria and but if you watch his horror as Louis the 14th and the grandson came to Philip the Fifth on the stage. In the process, the full balance of power in Europe was threatened and a new grand alliance was formed against Louis the 15th. War of the Spanish Succession, but was launched as the Austrian Habsburg, England, Dutch, pro-Austrian elements in Spain, France, Spain, and America. War of the Spanish Succession was the bloodiest conflict Europe. This war of Louis fought at Cuba. Yet powers joined the fighting, solid, visiting Russia, Portugal, and Savoy on the side of the Atlantic. It was a typical early modern European conflict with a few years of intense fighting, but needed to be mainly engagement. The pledging of rebellion. Thereafter, as each power navigated the national and logistics, bringing in an age of the four nations. Fighting started Italian, Irish, Caribbean, and emergency fighting. America becoming easy, impressive, essential, of the only Michael history. In the end, all sides agreed to compromise after they were worn down by the Philip V was accepted by the Austrian, British, Dutch, and Allies Canada, made in line with Charles II class. However, under the terms of the French, several treaties, 1740, it was stipulated that the Spain members of the French royal family would never be allowed to France and Spain. Therefore, the House of Bourbon replaced the House of Habsburg as the royal, saying that the two kingdoms would never. Austria, conquered by receiving the Spanish Netherlands around modern-day Belgium, as well as most of Spain's territories in Italy, such as the Duchy of Milan, while Britain acquired Gibraltar, after Newfoundland and the Pacifico, right to trade slaves from Africa into the vast Spanish Empire. The end of the War of the Spanish Succession was the last major act of the life of King Louis. In 1715 started the summer of January, and in its trade at Versailles, on the 1st of September. He was 4 days shy of his 77th birthday. While monarchs certainly lived longer lives than him, his succession when he was only 4 years old means that his reign ran 10 years and 100 days, the longest edifying reign of any monarch. He was laid to rest in the royal metropolis of Elizabeth in northern Paris. Remains there were exhumed successively, painted terror during the French Revolution. A bizarre boy, mummy heart ended up in and was accidentally eaten by the English theologian, apologist, Giovanni in the middle of the 19th. Has never been fully verified. Well, death of the sheer fate of reign meant that the succession to the French throne was far from straightforward. Until 1711, eldest son, from his marriage to Maria Theresa, known as the Comte de Prince, had been the heir to the throne. The Fox paid his life in payments back. 10 months later, the new heir, Wilhelm's son, the 14th grandson, also prematurely left for 9 years Chinese after refusing to avoid contact with his wife after she became pregnant. Louis' grandfather's wife, Marie Antoinette's boy, had 3 children, each of whom came to be in line with a well-established custom of him. One died in infancy, and the second passed away within a few weeks of the first. Therefore, it was their third and only surviving son now became the heir to the throne in 1712. He succeeded Louis XIV, his grandfather, at 5 years of age in 1715. As such, the implication of Louis XIV, having reigned for 70 years, was that the succession dipped to a whole generation of the house of Louis XV would rule for 59 years himself on account of his young age at the time of his succession. The kind of royal absolutism that had been established under his great-grandfather persevered for decades to come, and France's rivalry with Britain became so great that historians now characterize the 18th century as a second 100 years war between them. A lot of France's power, though, was based on borrowed money and the illusion of greatness that Louis XIV had so carefully cultivated. In the 1780s, a fiscal and agrarian crisis precipitated the collapse, an outbreak of the French Revolution. In the end, the absolutism that Louis XIV created led to a violent reaction, though in 3/4 of a century after his passing. That 72 years and 110 days, no monarch was ever ruled the nation for longer in human history than Louis XIV did over France. He would have scratched his name into the annals of history through this alone. However, his 72-year reign was also immensely important in early modern Europe. He rose to the throne when French royal power was growing again after centuries of centralization and war, notably the long French wars of religion between 1552 and 1558. Admittedly, the process had been started under his father and grandfather, machinations of politicians like Cardinal here, but it was during Louis XIV's reign that royal in France. Himself unequivocally as God's representative on earth, sent all France, also center of all things of power. Mine, État de Bois, I am Spain, has become famous as an expression of of royal absolute. Louis' policies reflected Europe itself, and all power in France, whether it was vast, and as complex as Versailles, and its villages court, perhaps the uncommon capital, or many wars against Dutch Republic, English and Austrian. Louis did not achieve the goal of extending France, trying to extend France's borders east and south in ways that are reflected in France's geography. Then, because of the war's oppression, contemporaries had a mix. It was revived by many European governments, especially in London and Amsterdam. Elsewhere, though, in capitals like Vienna, Madrid, Berlin, and Petersburg, where absolutism failed in the 18th century, the 14th was absolute our enemy. All others come. Our French reform culture, as it existed at Versailles, was emulated across Europe for 100 years. Many of Louis' projects failed spectacularly, but there is no denying changed history that seemed the early 18th century Europe to a greater extent than almost any person during his time. No king ever held much power as he. What do you think of King Louis XIV? Was he really a magnificent ruler who managed to turn France back into a great European power after a century? Order or to run based on borrowed money and faith? Please know in the comments. In time, thank you very much for watching.
children. Last week, that abuses. Today, Oxford, they were granted grand title of the state and married to royal, but they also prejudice upon courtiers who were born on the law. 14. Five and marriage of a husband, daughter of ended a long course of education and with hope that she would the king of children, so the wise profession, but selected a relation as the king's mate did not work out well. Maria Theresa was a member of the Habsburg family, one glorious respect and a host of problems of hospitality. Opposite her younger half-brother, drugs. He was unimpressed why still taking her first year of marriage. He gave birth to a healthy son. But in the years that followed, he had 5 more children, who all young and dead. While the king suffered and children, he also had to bring her there. Now, but she floated on children, baby girls, minimized and important titles. Daniel de la Bonne and first and first entrance Maria and became proud mother and adultery. Now, when we show this public court, we gave birth and service. We need to return to court, but we have first come out and man born by the court and so humiliated that he ran to church. Then, and gave birth to 2 more sons, the musician, and Henrik, here, and 85 other of possible these have often still now. We live with child all childhood. One, the father recognized and defined her to make it ball, but not at possession at this time. Child hired her to ignore her mentioned bond after years tired of black and black force and black children. Well, they were out of the house with his brother, who ball and his children, and was gone without his daughter. control, and exercise and emotion integrity. King Louis Banished. Children, yes, but while noble titles and of Libra are nice, what they really wanted was security by merch. I'm from today. This one honors President of England. Florida fought a civil war in South. Getting away in the 1916. February the 1st. Mary the 2nd. Only no monarchy. Her sister Anne. Victoria and the 4th. Second. 40-year reign. Again. Preserved reign. That my husband's time. T-shirts, hoodies, sofa, teacups, stickers, and more. They utterly subscription and teacups today and help support the channel. Use promo code 10 on. And now, history. Most of them are wrong. The legitimate. The town. What more is there? Really expensive. Talk. Brother. First. Small. Feminine. Sexual. Mother. Mother. They. 25 hours. Canadian people and people. It's count. This. Also know connotation of cataract. They had sex. Boys. They came to learn also Spanish, Spain, and Russian, who wants to marry them off and possible cover up scandal, and relationships. Five. That's something wrong. Rejected. Soldiers like Flanders. Wild hair, skill, and software advisement, all cover things on the battlefield, father, Mark, I ought third, or one, half, so it was suspected that he may not have died, but may have been a mysterious man in time past. King Louis II, mistress, François Economy, husband, Amanda, youth, and dad, her first child, Ball. Then was named after Augustus, Rome, first emperor, and the third. Then François raised all of the names in a house in the palace in Paris. They rarely called his mother, even called his name. Close to the president, the third mother, because of a birth injury, but leg was bigger than the other. François, doctors in Belgium, mountains, there, father, minimized, siblings, the next years, support, and made a degree of roots from colonel, general, and guard, father, child, and became an honor, retained a strip of silver, However, a more intelligent but was daughters, all three were very short. Like the middle daughter, as she was at college together. Her elder sister was attended at their wedding, and the guest of honor was second. Ah, how excellent. He of his mother and after one time had been attached to court because of poison, but not by them. Really? Them. As that next court as a couple, their marriage was happy. Son, as was often a people, they had children, harvested as a kid. Because he died, but he warned her little and he had known her. They always got closer to the covenant, and that is not until after death. He said, wife, in 1711, son, who died of smallpox at 9, and years later, his wife died. Burgundy, single at 9, his brother, was found. It was safe, same, and women descendants guard, entirely. Then the all the time role was his great grandson, who, as grandson, found married having a just spot for one name. Their wife was not out. Future of Rome. That he made to a son, of whom and brother who had a daughter, because the blood was out of them discussion as the king self-refrigerated son and place in his will post the statue was null and grandson. But Orleans had been told by Parliament and himself, urged by his wife, joined Denmark against the region. The plot was foiled after visit for 5 years. His wife was sustained downfall, but he was pleased to retire to the States and lived together. He tried to find housing for his children, but the hard members of the court refused the proposal and all married. He approved 6. Caesar Count of was named after Caesar, as was common among his sons. Heard and was granted the title of Abbot of Soul. Mine, and older than his mother had walked them. Doctors tried a number of things, but rather than physician, as the Czar died at his head and was buried at the end of the all her father's cousins and the fidelity of her, and well, smallpox. Her husband, Ray, like his mother and his grandfather, was back to health. Unfortunately, the grandfather died. After Francois's mother was banished from court, she went to visit her at London, where she had retired and was very close. He was greatly affected by her mother's death, but her father forbade her to wear black at court. She gave birth to 7 children, all of whom survived adulthood. It is likely that her fourth daughter, Anne, told of a love affair with her stepmother. Then her husband became a personality, serious and sadness. His father died and but he died a year later. The Dowager Princess had a portrait of himself in the star, but suspected that the priest was not here. He frequently attended court with his brother in the hope of ingratiating himself. But when he died, rejected by the news of peace from Adelaide, from the town on the right. All that here, the phone and the side people. He had a long term affair with the merchant. Hey, still, as say, and her, all and our gallery. Home. Francois, godmother, son, died at 17. Francois believed the long inherited her mother's beauty and was a proud girl. It was said that she was never the daughter of the king and went on toilet. The former governor, Madame Known, charges and declared granted titles and grand marriages. One was secured the highest wall. The court was scandalized by the match between a bit of blood and his daughter. His mother left him and total treated her daughter-in-law, Jane, and ignored her grandchildren. He complained that Francois believed she had done my son an honor by marrying him, and she was not different, legitimate, and illegitimate. The couple read and two ceremony place in the royal chapel at the time. A banquet was held in the hall of mirrors. Francois and traveled and lodged with the king, dined with him, and returned present. Turn you for above, so the elder sisters were also hurt that their father came a dowry of life. Wanted a position among sisters, and all three were hostile to each other. Also, husband, womanized, befriended her, helped her to learn the complicated etiquette of the court, and parties of honor. Francoise Marie died in 9. She was the last surviving child of Louis XIV. Her descendants include the last kings of Italy and Portugal, and the current king of Belgium and Spain. Louis Alexandre, Count of Banished. After Alexander the Great, epitomized the count and admiral during the War of Succession. 2-year-old Alexandra was given the task of defending Sicily. At 18, he was named Marshal of France, and at 26, he commanded the French fleet at the Battle of Malaga. He preferred to avoid the trauma of the court and getting pulled in to Sibley's intrigue. His father added both he and his elder brother a move succession, but while his brother was power of Louis Alexandre held a position in the council. He remained single until the age of 45. He fell in love with July, the 35-year-old widow of his maternal half-brother. The couple wed in secret and had one son together. Louis Alexandre died at 59. Armand Gaston Maximilien Cardinal of Strasbourg, born shortly after his mother Anne de Rouen-Chavaux had a affair with the king. He was the 7th of her 11 children. Her husband Armand as his own, but it was noted how much he resembled the king. Armand rose high in both the church and politics, far beyond enjoy a special royal patronage. Became Cardinal of Strasbourg, and his father became council during the minority of the Rouen and lived there until 1955. Blanche was the daughter of Claude Bondier. Claude was a lady in waiting. Madame asked Claude other rivals as who had been covered and waited for her only child and claimed it was the king. Dubious. The baby was officially recorded after the king and Blanche. Louise grew up too greatly king, but continued to deny his paternity and treated her as her mother. Claude was serious. She was implicated in the affair of poison, and may have considered the king then legitimized Louise as he had done his children by his official mistresses. Claude was banished from court. She raised her daughter in Paris, but died at 7, taken in by her mother's friends. At 20, he married Bernard de Cray, Baron, a lieutenant in the army. The king sent his valet to oversee the wedding and granted a salary of 40,000 livres, a fraction of the million her half-sisters had received. They wed princes. Her husband's position would have allowed ease to enter mother's court, but she never wanted to go. The couple had 11 children. 2 of her daughters attended Madame Dog's boarding girls. Granddaughters of the king. Louise died of smallpox at the age of 6. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching. the 14 mistresses. Louis XIV of France from 1638 to 1750 ruled over the court at his side through magnetism of his personality. The great and mighty of France was desperate in the height of stunting. His image was paramount to maintaining his place at the center of the universe. The 5'4" monarch wore high heels and voluminous wigs, and he made sure the world knew he was a virile man with plenty of mistresses. While at least one big and fit was dead, he was emotionally three women in discussion: Cavalier, Madame de Montfort, and finally Madame de Montfort, whom he married after mistresses of Louis XIV. Natalie Banished was mistress of the bedchamber to mother Anne of Austria, and enjoyed the privilege of visiting mother her regular enemas. Though described as ugly, was intelligent and cunning, and had many lovers. When the young king was a teenager, his mother worried that he might suffer from the same sexual dysfunction as his father, i.e., gay. So he asked his 13-year-old friend, Flower, son, wanted Catherine attention, as it was customary to imitate the king. Catherine's papers were in high demand, as they had before lovers. The highlight of the years by the time of his death at 75. Poverty. Louis' chief minister was Italian, Cardinal Mazarin. His sister brought her 5 daughters to Paris with the hope that their uncle might find them a husband. The beautiful girls were collectively known as the Mazarenettes. Louis had love affairs with them. Marie was the third next sister. Her mother was color, scandal, and she tried to shoot her mother up in the convent. Enough, the 17-year-old Louis became so besotted with grief that he wanted to marry her, but a king is of death. Cardinal Mazarin broke the couple up. He was wed to Maria of Spain, and Marie was back to Italy to wed Prince Lorenzo Colonna. On their wedding night, the bride discovered that the bride was still a virgin. Marie gave birth to 2 sons, but her husband was abusive, and she feared he would murder her. She left with her sister, Hortense, who had become a lover of King Charles II of England. Hortense and Marie traveled Europe extensively and became 2 of the first women to publish memoirs. She died at 65. Louise Cavalier was the daughter of a military officer. When her father died, her mother married a butler of Lyon. Louise became a companion to his daughter and gaining distinction beyond her home birth. Louise had an exquisite complexion, blonde hair, eyes, and a smile. She walked with a limp because her legs were shorter than the other, but she wore custom shoes and she earned a coveted place as a maid of honor to the sister-in-law Henrietta of England. The brother, the beast, was no companion than his young wife. Elected, yet had formed a close relationship with King Louis. The mother was disturbed by the nation. Diverse here as though that as he was actually having an affair with another lady. So the king started he was at 6-year-old and thought he was just in love with her. Louis overheard her telling a friend, not the king, and like a real-life royal rom-com through the reality the church determined condemning the king's adultery. Troubled conscience, she ran away to London, followed her and begged her to return to him during her first pregnancy. When she was away from the court, son Charles, but the news of the king's first illegitimate child spread and born, honored his proud brother as Fritz, but when she died, the king wanted to flaunt his adultery and ability. He ordered his niece Mass on his left side while his wife was on his right. He was ashamed and once again went to a convent. This time, he sent a servant to free her. Princess Henriette had news with waiting. She was ambitious, new mistress, and drew his away from Louise, who was pregnant with a child. Louis was ready to move on, but he was unable to break up. He moved Madame Montesson into the apartment next to Louise and often walked through lover's quarters to get to his bedroom. Montesson was humiliated Louise by insisting that she assist her in her left like a servant. Louise took the abuse in the hope that Louise would turn to her. Not. The king didn't legitimize their two divided children and created Louise Jessica Valliere, but she said it felt like retirement gifts. After 3 years of playing heel, she gave up and decided to retire to a convent. Montespan did not want to leave, as this would make her the object of public instead. She tried to frighten tales of the dark life of nuns. Why? I shall only have to remember when you suffer here and all the pain of life. Louise left herself at the feet of Maria Luisa and begged for her assistance. Left for the convent, and this time not after his return. Then the next 3 years as a nun, no shame, died at 65. Olympia was the second eldest sister. She was vivacious, black eyes, a brilliant complexion, and a full figure. She was close friends with Princess Henriette. She tried to win the king from Louise de Valliere, and though he destroyed Olympia's arms, remained from Louise. Olympia was young and saw Louise as an enemy. He married Prince Maurice of Savoy and had 8 children. Princess Henriette died with 3. 6. There were whispers. Poison. And again was infected. In 1479, Marie Madeleine d'Orsay, the Marquise de Rambouillet, was found to have poisoned her father and brothers in order to inherit their fortune. The scandal rocked the aristocracy, and suddenly everyone was suspicious that their nearest and dearest were purchasing poison or inheritance patterns away with them. The resulting witch hunt was known as the affair of poison. Olympia was accused of having the Henrietta and her husband and plotting to kill Valliere. Come back before you say sorry. He was probably husband likely died of illness. Cheated, harassed by the country. Olympia became waiting. Daughter, Maria Luisa, who had just married Rose James. She died at 26 of appendicitis, but the tragedy had mission on Olympia, who was once again forced to leave. She died in Brussels on her 70th birthday. Bon was born into a family Charlotte Banished was from a prominent family. Her brother, Guy Armand, conducted simultaneous affairs with the Duke of Orleans and his wife, that of her cousin and Sultar. The pair were not allowed to marry, but they had children anyway. Unwed, among
Claro.
Sarah has been Italian and survived. Well, later, court found Monaco dull, but was somewhat cheered by her brother, Antonin, solitary, died. Children, all things but it was Monaco, but how sure they were his is death. After much chiding, by my parents, waiting on death, the weekend, mother bear, and attracted mothers in herself. She was described as eating for pleasure and Moritz, her jilted husband, who got into a duel with one of her lovers. At the means of course, downfall, she left with an enemy of death and was exiled, of course, to the compound visited her longtime lover, Anthony, married Monaco, years, but the her herself, song, and she was thrilled with Paris and his daughters. Her eldest son, ancestor of the first prince, Albert II. Gabrielle de Rochechouart had a share with the king of his sister, Françoise, over fashion. Gabrielle supported her sister and was at her bedside gave birth to her first child. Gabrielle married and had children. He was and is also an ancestor of Prince Albert of Monaco through his maternal grandfather, Pierre, Duke of Monaco. François and Camille du Rochefort and his son, a scion of two of France's oldest families. He had large, wide, and curly, one-colored hair, a curvaceous figure, and considered a great beauty. At 20, as his honor to successful yet, he fell in love with a courtier as his older man in school and had France. So instead, she married Louis, the Marquis of Montesson. A week after giving birth to her first child, she lay on course. He was cultured, stylish, sensationalist, and set of fighting wit. She used to mock others. Many men courted her. At the sight that higher, she cultivated friendships with and believed there until she was yes, able. Both women left the court at the time sure that was struck. King was bathing and she had dropped her towel all over for relief. Was sufficient interest for mistress and teacher. She also enjoyed humiliating speech until she finally gave up and left court to become a nun. François gave birth to 7 children by the king. Sadly, only 4 survived adulthood. They were all legitimized by their father and given grand titles. Governess François Day named them and saw their mother, who was immersed in the affair with the king and the court, had extravagant taste. Her room was filled with heads and flowers, and next to the private art gallery, the king showered on her, but she sent back till it's not standard. He ordered a science to make a marble bathtub dismissed and had it installed in a building at the sky. By 1877, Montclair had been primary mistress for 10 years, 9 pregnancies, and her club of 2 a year. He was also moving to pension. Many young ladies at court eager to advance themselves. Royal romance. When the affair of the prison broke out, Francois perhaps conspired with the fortune teller that was home. It was said that one sacrifices over Francois' body and that they sacrificed the baby. No evidence against her was found. But her reputation was ruined and he no longer trusted her. He dismissed her from court, but granted her a pension of £500. He gave generously to various hospitals and patronized artists and writers. Anne de Rouen Chabot was the daughter of a princess who was nobleman. At 16, she married the officer. Dearly, Anne was a great beauty, had hair, skin, and all the sides. She maintained her figure with a strict diet of chicken, salad, fruit, dairy products, and water wine, while of the drama between old mistress Louise de Lavalier and new mistress Madame de Montespan, he escaped court to visit the chateau de Ball. There he met Anne and Lady Fair. Appointed her a lady and the son Armand, strongly named. Louis granted large sums of money to Anne's husband for his way. Anne and the king had an on-off affair, but devoted to Madame de Maintenon. Anne bowed away from court and retired to stage with her husband. Isabelle de Louis was the daughter of a minor noble. When she was 15, the 8-year-old Duke of Lorraine fell in love with her. He had already been his wife, Mary of Baroness, then abandoned her as a child, but as Isabel left her for 14 years. When she complained that she was ready to be prison for slandering a noble, at 19, of honor and yet when she died Isabel Isabel's beauty and accent attracted at court, but she rejected all while singing her life without song. Isabel rejects the king and hair. Montespan was furious. She mocked Isabel's accent and spread rumors that she had leprosy. Montespan and Louis knocked, and the king pretended to Isabel, but Montespan left her. Himself with Isabel once more. Flag Montespan as the new official mistress, and soon the ladies at court were curtsying to her, but the king was irritated with her boldness, and when Montespan returned, away. Her debt piled up. Back after pension, after all. Isabel never married and lived 9. Her cook and chambermaid were the grandparents of Madame Berry, who was 15. Dawn was the daughter of a famous actress. She became a trusted lady companion to Madame Paul, who acted king while she was a baby birth. There is no other rival so they raised funds to send her to court as a maid of honor to sister-in-law, Elizabeth Charlotte, Duchess of Orleans. Elizabeth described Angelique as lovely as an angel, but stupid as a basket. At the time, she was in love with the Duchess of Orleans and was often in the company of his children's governess. But when 17-year-old Angelique lost her king, took on both of the other women, and their fierce rivalry ensued. In her company, the 41-year-old king felt young again. He dressed splendidly and presented her with a pearl gray carriage and 8 horses. While the couple were out hunting, Angelique's hat was caught in a branch, so she tied the top of her hair with ribbon. Louis liked the rustic style, and the next day, all of the horse and Angelique was pregnant. Somehow, her team and bears menagerie had managed to find and destroy Angelique's apartment. Neighbor, early son, King grew tired of her, and he created her a montage as a parting gift. Angelique retired to the convent, where she delivered the second child. Owing she died, some say he came and wept at her bedside, though it is more likely that he had already forgotten about her. He died at just 18. There were rumors that Madame Swan had poisoned her, more likely died of tuberculosis in a complicated childbirth. The hairstyle she inspired, now called a montage, popular in type and became popular throughout Europe. Was born outside of a prison in Paris. Her father was a Huguenot who was in jail for conspiring against citizens. Hughes, daughter of a sailor, resulting in Francois' birth. Then her father up took his family to the French Caribbean colony of Martinique for 2 years, and then abandoned them. Francois' mother was able to get her children back to France, where she promptly died. Orphaned Francois at her and who gave her 2.5 years. She died in a Protestant religion rich in literature and science, but when her godmother was sick, convent, she resented her now limited education, but she became a devout Catholic. Then she was 17, her godmother introduced her to high society. She met poet Paul Fenot, 25 years later, who suffered crippling pain, but they cared for each other and married. More a nurse and a wife, Paul, for years education. After 8 years together, Paul died. His royal patronage stopped, and Francois left penniless. Planned to move to Lisbon to serve Marie Francoise, but left meeting song. Liked Francoise so much after the governess to her own children. Francoise raised and cared for them at Chateau de Saint-Germain. She also saw the king frequently and was one of the few people permitted to see him full. Louis was drawn to nature, in contrast to Madame Swan, emperor and theatric, spent much of his time in her company, discussing politics, economics, religion. Louis rewarded her with 200,000 livres, which she used to estate at Montreal. The king created her Montesson at the estate. Montesson grew jealous and fought with Montesson simply over children, but in the 80s, saw Montesson banished from the palace, and Montesson was placed at the king's side. Francois was 55, years older than King Louis. Queen Maria Theresa had been treated brutally by Montesson, but Francois treated with respect. The queen died at the age of 4. On her deathbed, she gave Francois a ring from her later, a few months later, Francois and King were married. Ceremony. Parents was fanatic. Francois and any children had possession. He was given a grand apartment opposite the king. Mistresses and publicly. Francois was the most politically important person in France after the king and was an unofficial prime minister. He founded Maison Royale de Saint-Louis, a school for impoverished school girls. Was expected mother and provided them an enlightened education far beyond what she had received. In 1750, died of gangrene 4 days before his 70th birthday. Francois had been companion for 3 decades. He lived another 3 years at the Banished monastery, where she was visited by Peter the Great of Russia. Mark had done a great service to the king and the nation. Francois died and was buried in fire at Saint-Pierre. In the next episode, we'll meet King Louis' illegitimate children. Some were granted grand titles, estates, and marriages, while some were ignored and sad. Don't want to wait for the next episode? Patrons get exclusive early access to almost all of my multi-part series on Patreon early. And help me make more fascinating history videos. Check out the link in the description. Thank you for watching.
Promising reform, ultimately failing to implement lasting changes, became a recurring pattern that only highlighted the monarchy's inability to address fundamental structural problems. The king's support for these ministers was typically half-hearted and easily withdrawn when faced with opposition from privileged interests. Social tensions reached new heights during this period as economic hardships spread throughout France. Poor harvests led to food shortages and bread riots in major cities, while the tax burden continued to fall disproportionately on those least able to bear it. The contrast between the suffering of ordinary people and the continued luxury of court life became increasingly stark and impossible to ignore. Stories of royal extravagance, often exaggerated but containing enough truth to be credible, circulated widely and fueled popular resentment against the monarchy. The king's personal life during this period became even more scandalous with his relationship with Madame de Barry, a woman of low birth whose influence over royal policy outraged both nobility and commoners, unlike previous royal mistresses who had at least maintained some pretense of dignity. De Barry's behavior was openly cruel and mercenary. Her presence symbolized for many French people the complete moral decay of the monarchy, abandonment of traditional values and responsibility. Opposition to Louis XVIII's reign also intensified in this period, as his support of the dissolution of various religious orders and his personal conduct alienated traditional Catholic supporters. The conflict between the monarchy and the religious and political issues created a constitutional crisis that Louis XV proved unable to resolve. His eventual decision to exile the parliament and replace it with more compliant courts only increased criticism of his authoritarian tendencies while failing to solve underlying problems. The influence of Enlightenment ideas continued to spread throughout French society during the early 1770s, providing intellectual justification